Following more than 100 days of evidence, a coroner has concluded that all 10 people shot dead in Ballymurphy in West Belfast in 1971 were entirely innocent and that their deaths were unjustified. Family members of the victims applauded after the verdicts were read out. A solicitor for the families said they will be pursuing civil actions against the British Ministry of Defence in light of the findings.
Entirely innocent of any wrongdoing. These words from a Belfast coroner are what the families of 10 people shot and killed in Ballymurphy in West Belfast have waited almost 50 years to hear. The victims, which include a Catholic priest and a mother of 8, were shot over the course of 3 days in August 1971, immediately after a policy of internment without trial was introduced in Northern Ireland. Their families have always maintained they were unarmed civilians who were killed by members of the British Army's parachute regiment.
It was just totally amazing because, for 50 years he's been branded a gunman. He was a 20-year-old civilian, and my mother and father and a lot of people that started our campaign with us have died, so they haven't seen this day. So today was a really great day.
The coroner found that all the Ballymurphy deaths were unjustified, and after a long campaign, families say they have corrected history.
It does ease our mind that my father was innocent, something we already knew. But at the moment, you can see, well, we're a big family. It's affected us in many, many ways. We'll rest easy. My father will rest easy. I'm sure he'll be proud of us.
The inquest found that 9 of the 10 victims were shot by British Army soldiers. But Mrs Justice Siobhan Keegan said she couldn't definitively say who shot 49-year-old John McCurr. She said the fact there was no adequate investigation into his death at the time was a significant state failing, and she said it was a matter of grave concern, as it had hampered her in reaching a more definitive finding in relation to the death of an innocent civilian on the streets. A solicitor for the family said today's verdict is not the end.
The families, in light of these findings, will be pursuing civil actions against the Ministry of Defence. These findings today clearly outline that the British Army were not justified in using force.
Almost 50 years after they were killed, the coroner said that today must be a difficult occasion of remembrance for their families. She said that she hoped that they could get some peace now that the findings of these inquests have been delivered. Laura Hogan, RT News, Belfast.
The Ballymurphy victims were all Catholics and included a mother of 8 and a priest. They were shot over a 3-day period during an operation by members of the parachute regiment following the introduction of internment without trial. The British Army had claimed they were armed members of the IRA.
There was chaos and mayhem in many nationalist areas of Northern Ireland following the introduction of internment without trial in August 1971. The British Army's parachute regiment was sent into Ballymurphy in West Belfast with disastrous consequences. Over a 3-day period, 10 people were shot dead. Carmel Quinn has waited almost half a century for this day. She and her daughter, Mary Kate, followed the more than 100 days of inquest hearings. On the 10th of August 1971, her 20-year-old brother, John Lafferty, carried 8-year-old Carmel to the local community centre to catch a bus evacuating women and children to Kildare Army Camp.
John told me that everything was going to be okay. I was going on a wee holiday, and when I came back, everything would be back to normal.
The following day, he died after being shot in the back. No one has ever been charged in connection with any of the killings.
There has to be accountability. You can't come in and totally destroy a family, fracture a family that will never recover, and the other families. When the lawmakers become the lawbreakers, then there's no law.
The families of those who died refer to the killings as the Ballymurphy massacre. Their grief was compounded by false claims that all of those killed were armed members of the IRA. 38-year-old Father Hugh Mullen died while helping a wounded parishioner, despite waving a makeshift white flag.
He spoke to him and gave him a blessing, and then was starting to head back to get an ambulance to come and help the man. When he was shot with the first shot, he went down and then he was shot again.
Because he didn't deserve that. It's the truth. All we're interested is truth. We need truth.
Vincent Kearney, RTÉ News, Belfast.
Well, Vincent joins us now, as does our London correspondent Sean Whelan. Vincent, day has been a long time coming for the relatives, and as we saw there, a very emotional reaction from them.
Indeed, David, an outpouring of support from politicians on both sides of the border today. But as you say, the focus of this story today is on the families. Families who for almost half a century have felt they were wronged. Wronged, firstly, because their loved ones were killed without provocation, and wronged also by claims made at the time by the British Army and British government of the day that those killed were 9 gunmen and 1 gunwoman, mother of 8, Joan Connolly. The Army claimed all 10 killed were members of the IRA. That claim was today nailed firmly as a lie. Mrs Justice Keegan said all 10 were entirely innocent and said none of the killings could be justified. So the families today haven't got justice in the traditional sense of someone facing prosecution for the killings, certainly not at this stage anyway, but they have got the truth that their loved ones were entirely innocent. And throughout this campaign, the families have said that's what mattered most. So certainly today, David, there was a real sense of relief and a sense of vindication.
And Vincent, is that the end of the matter?
Well, you heard Laura Hogan's report there. The families are considering civil action against former British soldiers. I'm told that legal teams will also go through these inquest findings in great detail to see if there's any evidence that might lead to criminal prosecutions, charges against individual soldiers involved in some of these killings, and if not against individuals, possibly some kind of corporate manslaughter charge against commanding officers on the day. Families are also likely to go after the former head of the British Army, General Sir Mike Jackson, who gave evidence during the inquest. Back in 1971, he was a captain with a parachute regiment in Ballymurphy. He admitted during the inquest that he personally briefed a local newspaper in Belfast that 2 men who were shot that day were members of the IRA. Their families believe that he was also responsible for briefing about other family members, saying they were all gunmen and 1 gunwoman. During the inquest, General Mike Jackson denied there was a policy of conspiracy within the British Army, but the families believe there was a conspiracy, there was a cover-up, and they're likely to call for him to be stripped of his knighthood and any other honours he might have because of his performance, what he did back then, because, as I say, the coroner today said the claims about people being armed were absolute lies.
And Sean, at the same time as the verdicts were being delivered at the inquest, the Queen's speech was being delivered in Westminster behind you there, outlining the British government's legislative priorities. What did we hear about this proposal for an amnesty for military personnel involved in the Troubles?
Well, they didn't propose an amnesty. What they have proposed is that there would be legislation brought forward to clarify, as they put it, the position regarding prosecutions of former military personnel. They want to end what Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, during the debate that followed, referred to as vexatious prosecutions of soldiers and police from Northern Ireland. He did mention the Ballymurphy verdict, and he was one of the few people who did raise it in the House today. At the same time that that was going on, there was also a meeting of the Defence Committee in trying to hear from a former Defence Minister, Johnny Mercer, who had resigned over lack of progress to bring forward any kind of legislation in this area. He was questioned by 2 other former Defence Ministers who had also run into a quagmire trying to introduce legislation that might protect soldiers, again, from what they call vexatious prosecutions. Johnny Mercer insisting that there would be no amnesty. He said the army, the military, former personnel, they are not looking for an amnesty. What they want is to not have the risk of more prosecutions hanging over them once things have been properly investigated. He said anybody who has broken the law should face legal action against them, but there should also be some form of qualified, as he put it, statute of limitations that would reduce the risk of soldiers being prosecuted. He also argues that there should be some kind of a truth and reconciliation process in Northern Ireland so that everybody can find out what went on in the past. He said it's a difficult thing to legislate through, as other ministers agreed, but he said it's not beyond the bounds of human endeavour to bring about a situation where most of the people who were involved in the situation in Northern Ireland can be protected from what he calls vexatious prosecutions, but he did insist all the time anybody who did break the law should be prosecuted, and he said that is something military veterans also want to see. They don't want an amnesty.
Okay, Sean and Vincent, thank you very much indeed for that.
Still to come, terror at school.